Today I'm going to be discussing much more about the story and the content of the map. To those of you who saw the PCD the other day, we got into pencils and projections and all kinds of things like that. But instead I want to tell you a bit more about why I drew this map and what's in it. As the weeks, months and years passed since I began this in May 2014, this grew from a loose concept into a behemoth that's demanded total dedication. I'm still in the last stages drawing it, so my perspective is from deep inside the project, but I hope you can have some interesting takeaways here. The two main areas we'll discuss is a bit on my background, and then the story inside the map. The content. Deciding what to include and what to omit is a challenge central to any map, but in a pictorial one, where artistic license removes many limits, that challenge enters all kinds of interesting terrain. What best defines somewhere? How do we view the places we live? What is place, and what does a place feel like? What is a symbol for? But first, let me take you way back. I was born and raised in the South Island of New Zealand, Te Waipounamu, the waters of greenstone. It's a land of dramatic relief and incredible beauty. Mountains cloaked in primeval temperate rainforest, ocean spray against groves of nikau palm, glaciers, and turquoise lakes, and roaring surf. As a kid, I loved grabbing the map when we hit the road, tracking us toward the next destination. I grew familiar with our distinctive coastline, dreaming of all the possible adventures, all the wild hinterland that lay in wait. Now, I grew up in Nelson, which is at the top of the South Island there, but would fly to the capital, Wellington, often to see my grandfather. The flight is barely 30 minutes, but you pass over an amazing array of landscapes. The drowned valleys of the Marlborough Sounds, tiny boats cruising between hidden coves and past rocky headlands. Facing south, the rich forests of Nelson give way to the other side of the rain shadow, a very dry, golden brown landscape. Bridges over braided rivers, vineyards and salt flats, the avalanche-scarred peaks of the Kaikoura Ranges looming behind like gods. It was stunning. The places in which my life was set, suddenly revealed from above as part of a grand theatre of geography, the greatest masterpiece on earth. Now, whether or not you're so intrigued by geography, it's certainly easy to see that New Zealand's is dramatic. It is also scalable. You can grasp its dimensions because it's pretty small, about the land area of Colorado, and it has clear limits. Being so unusually isolated, it stops at the open South Pacific on all sides. I fell in love with maps young in large part due to New Zealand's geography. I could grasp its dimensions, but the size and variety still felt immense. In fact, the very notion that we lived on an island seemed wrong. As a kid, I felt islands were those little mounds of sand with a palm tree in the middle, and good for marooning someone. No way was my majestic home deserving such a label. But then I'd look at a globe and be awestruck. We were tiny. Dwarfed by our closest neighbour, Australia, which is itself dwarfed by every other continent. As I was yet to travel, I almost couldn't believe the rest of it was real. How could the world be so big? I wondered if these vast foreign lands even existed. I'd only ever truly know they were real if I saw them for myself. So when I finally did do that, of course, it changed everything. Fast forward to 2011, I'm 21, and on a 6-month visa, I flew one way to Sacramento. A summer with a friend in Northern California was lined up, and after that, it was wide open. Finally, I'd get to see just how real the rest of the world was. Now, like many, my first view of North America was flying into LA. Beneath the San Gabriel Mountains, I saw a thick layer of smog, and beneath that, a sea of urbanization. I can't express that moment. Life-changing. I knew that in this city, more than 4 times the population of my country were living out their lives. When I talk about a grand theatre, I knew that beyond those mountains lay 49 more states, many of them larger than New Zealand by every metric. Drive 40 hours east and you're in Manhattan. North of these United States is Canada, a country with the same land area, but a population less than the state I was about to arrive in. The scale was too much. I remember pressing my face into the window, stunned by this grand frontier. I was unable to fathom the real-life experience of that scale. What's it like to call a place this big home? I still ask that question. how do you get your head around it? So the next 6 months I got lost in America, from a summer in the Sierra Nevada to the Florida Keys. I got lost in the best music I'd ever heard, night after night on Frenchman Street in New Orleans. Hiked the Blue Ridge Mountains, nearly crashed a car in a snowstorm in West Texas. From New York City to Monument Valley, I fell deeply in love with the breadth and variety of this continent. But my 6 months were almost up and my savings were gone, so I flew north to Vancouver where I could legally work. Now, arriving in one of the world's most expensive cities with no money in the middle of winter, it wasn't fun at all at first. But finally, I had a chance to process the previous 6 months, and much like many of us, I'm sure, here, the way that I catalogued it was through geography, place. All I'd learned and experienced through this time was plotted out on a big map in my head. But not like before, where the geography of New Zealand was no more the real world than blueprints are a building. Now it had come alive in vivid colour. I'd seen that the rest of the world existed, finally, and North America was the proof. I obsessed over this under the grey Vancouver winter. I'd sketched maps of the US and Canada at every opportunity, dreaming of an impossibly expensive summer. First to Haida Gwaii, then the Northern Lights, see the polar bears in Manitoba, drive all the way to Newfoundland. I just had to save enough money before summer lifted the frozen spell from my new home. But 5 months as a line cook in Vancouver wasn't enough to fund a damn thing, not even my rent. But I did manage a flight to Montreal halfway through summer. If I was going to be broke for a year in this country, I'd at least be broke in more than one place. And Montreal, this French-speaking city under a hill on an island in a river, it was the most intriguing choice. And it was a great choice indeed. This is a beautiful city. And it's where the drawing really began. The last time I was here in Montreal, it was November 2012. I bid farewell to my housemate Douglas as he went off to work and fondly looked around my apartment, taking it in one last time. It was my final morning after 5 months here. A bus to New York was leaving in a few hours. I was headed south, fleeing the winters people spoke of like it was Game of Thrones or something. I turned to the kitchen and stared at the map. The map stared back at me. What was I thinking? See, I've always imagined a big pictorial map filled with skylines and landscapes and so much detail you could forever get lost in it. I never thought that I would have the skills all the time, so it was more that I just wished somebody would make a map like that. But when my housemate Douglas suggested that I perk up our crappy old fridge with a little art, my fascination with this continent was at fever pitch. Immediately I picked up the nearest pen and started drawing a map, freehand, loaded with skylines. Clearly it was impulsive, because a rusted old fridge from the side of the road, actively in use every day next to a sink, is not the best medium for a hand-drawn map. But I'd started, and now I had to finish. This took me about a month, working infrequently, and on my last morning in Montreal 5 years ago, I stared at this map for a while and imagined what it would look like were it 100 times better. Color, detail, accuracy, not being on a fridge. The good news is this map here has survived to this day in Douglas's apartment in Petite Italie, and the fridge still works fine. We'll be reuniting with it sometime in the next few days. I'm very excited. Hopefully you can put together a bit of a crew and go see him. I haven't floated that idea yet, but we'll see. So, a fridge got mapified. 6 months later, I'm in Perth, Western Australia, and drawing a better map was heavy on my mind. I wanted to familiarise myself with this new region while developing my drawing and learning to use colour pencils. So this map here, South Asia and Australasia, it took about 6 months. Fast forward now to mid-2014, and I've settled in Melbourne, Australia, and started working on drawing North America. For real this time. For as much as I enjoyed drawing that fridge, it'd never be close to that vision of a grand pictorial map filled with skylines and colour. And after drawing this piece, it seemed that maybe I could find the time and might develop the skills to be the creator of such a map. But more than 3 years on and still drawing, it turns out that finding the time was no joke. I found the time to start something big without knowing how long it would take, and I've had to continue finding the time ever since giving up became unthinkable, which was the moment I started. Just like with the fridge, now that I had begun, I had to finish. Except this time it's on a 4 by 5 foot sheet of heavy paper, and I've got a freaking magnifying lamp. It quickly took over my life. Now I gained thousands of hours of experience as this map progressed and the years went by, and that led to vast leaps in quality. This qualitative gulf became so stark that I'm currently having to redraw much of the early stuff. The Western Lower 48 and Western Canada, we talked about that more on PCD. It's involved the removal of pen cities with a knife at a pretty frightening scale. Did this add another 6 months, maybe even a year to the map? Yes. Is it worth it? Yes. I learned cooking that when you mix older produce with newer produce, everything is now the same age as the older produce. If you allow subpar content to persist, it brings down the overall quality of a piece. Perfectionism is problematic, but it's a good filter for quality. Now, let's take a little look at the contents here. What's in this map and why? We can only look at a few points of interest today, but hopefully the examples that I've chosen can shed some light on what it's all about. Now, on a map with a very specific functional purpose, that information is defined. The data set is hopefully somewhat clear, but with this map here, I was looking for something more emotional, harder to categorize. I wanted to use real, informative data to draw a captivating piece of art. As imperfect as it may be, articulating a science with art can make the science exciting to many more people. With geography as the science, the map artist gets to dive into the greatest reservoir of material there is, our beautiful planet. I try to cast a wide net, learn what I can, and draw content representative of a place, content that would be familiar to a local. This is why all 600 towns and cities on this map are composed of real buildings and landmarks, whether it's Los Angeles or Bluefields, Nicaragua. I try to keep stock buildings to a minimum and just draw what's there. See, when I looked down upon the South Island of New Zealand as a kid, seeing my home displayed in that grand theatre of geography, I really knew some of what was down there, and that made all the difference. No, I couldn't see individual grapes from 10,000 feet, but I knew that they were as important to understanding that valley as the towering mountains that frame it. So as I research North America, region by region, city by city, I'm trying to learn about what's down there. I try to imagine the experience of that place. What is it to be that place, all physical and cultural geography considered? So, in a vast and complex world, how do you choose what to draw? Firstly, obvious features like national parks, cities, staple crops, they're all a given. They're great choices. I mean, hell, if you include the basics, your map quickly starts to look a lot like the place you're mapping. Manhattan needs the Empire State Building. San Francisco needs the Golden Gate Bridge. If you draw Chichen Itza, the Yucatan will quickly come into focus. But outside of the obvious, it gets pretty difficult fast. Personally, I like content with layers of meaning. Here's one example. The Californian red-legged frog in Calaveras County. It's here for a few reasons. Firstly, it's endemic to California and is the state amphibian. But why here? Here, just in case. Well, Mark Twain published a short story in 1865 called The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. It's a piece of fiction set in Angels Camp, California, right where the frog is. It was extremely popular and was a turning point for his nascent career. So, one of this continent's most celebrated authors launched his career writing about jumping frogs in Calaveras. It became so iconic to the county that Angels Camp, or Frogtown, as it's now often called, has an annual jumping frog jubilee. Interestingly, Twain's fictional story created fame for Calaveras that ushered fiction into reality. It did not have a jumping frog jubilee before Twain. It reminds me a little of what happened to Burkittsville, Maryland after the Blair Witch Project brought it notoriety. There was no witch in Burkittsville before, but there's certainly one there now. So, what does the red-legged frog bring? What layers are here? Yep. State amphibian, endemic to California, symbol of a story that launched a legendary author's career, symbol of an annual event, and iconic of both the county and the town. It's the same reason I like drawing flags to denote capitals. Rather than underlining the label or using a star symbol, I just put the flag flying above houses of government, usually the legislature. So, what do you learn when you spot a capital city? That the city is the capital of an entity, the flag of the entity, and the buildings of the legislature. Usually you only get the first one, But here there are several extra layers of meaning, and keep in mind, flags contain symbols and colours with a lot of extra meaning too. And the good thing about extra meaning is that it doesn't necessarily mean extra stuff. Keep it tidy with good, multi-layered content. That's the point of a symbol, to compress information. One frog was able to say at least 5 things. In the more than 100 capitals across this map, the information being provided has been at least tripled. Sometimes just dig deeper on content that you're including anyway. If you're drawing a ship near a port, look into the vessels that frequent that port. Choose one. Perhaps there's a well-known ferry that stops here. Does it see many cruise ships? Are there many famous wrecks? What's better to include, an oil tanker or a freighter? Same again for purely decorative flourishes. When drawing musical instruments, I often like to add a few notes around them just for a little volume. Usually I just made up something random in the past, but that changed when I drew Cuba. With these conga enclaves in Matanzas, the birthplace of rumba, I drew rumba clave. Then, down in Guantanamo province, a Cuban tres plays the first bar of Guantanamera, one of the most iconic songs out of Cuba. Now, these might seem like tiny little micro details, but if you're drawing decorative notes anyway, why not? It will matter to a lot of people locally and make your map further in tune with the experiential qualities of a place. If you're drawing the forget-me-not, Alaska's state flower, right there, is there a way to arrange the flowers for another layer of meaning? Perhaps they could channel the constellations on the Alaskan flag, Polaris and Ursa Major. Furthering this theme, I like to ensure that different images are used for the same content. Even for something like an ear of corn, why draw it the same way every time? I mean, at the very least, that's not realistic. With more than 400 animals on this map, there are many that repeat. 25 different bear, 12 caribou, 8 moose, 4 jaguar. Not a single one repeats its pose. Now, of course, most maps do need their symbols consistent, but you can tell a moose no matter what it's doing. Every bear strikes a different pose, and so every bear tells a different story. Now, there's one final example I want to leave you with, a particular feature that taught me a lot. We're off to Costa Rica now to see the clay-coloured thrush, or yiguiro as it is known locally. It's the country's national bird. Now, when prepping Costa Rica, I found it very strange that a boring old thrush would be the national bird of a country home to around 5% of Earth's species. And the jungles of Central America have no shortage of amazing bird life, and its other countries have choices you'd more expect. Down there, Panama has the harpy eagle, Honduras the scarlet macaw, Belize the toucan, while Nicaragua and El Salvador share the guarabarranco. National birds might seem trivial, but they often play important roles in a country's identity. Just think of the American bald eagle. Or in my case, coming from New Zealand, I've identified as a Kiwi my entire life. Costa Rica, where 2 continents and 2 oceans meet, is famous for its biodiversity. So I was truly puzzled that a thrush was the standard bearer for such a place. I wasn't even sure that I would actually draw it, even though every country on this map hosts its national bird somewhere. But Costa Rica is a tiny country. Why allocate valuable real estate to a thrush? Well, I dismissed the yiguiro completely until I hit the last empty space left in the country. Uneasy about breaking national bird precedent, I read on. Turns out that this little thrush over here was chosen for its familiarity, friendliness, and alluring song. They tend to live close to people and are common sights in cities and towns. The male song goes into hyperdrive and mating season, coinciding with the start of the rains. They've long been featured in Costa Rican music and literature and were named the national bird 40 years ago. Suddenly, the little yiguiro is looking far more interesting. Suddenly, it dawned on me that I'd missed the importance of something by focusing only on appearances. This charming bird was so well chosen as a national icon that it resonates with people's actual lives, far more than rarer birds. Most Kiwis haven't seen a kiwi in the wild. Scarlet macaws are very rare in Honduras, but in Costa Rica you can predict the rains off this bird's song. A humble choice, but one grounded to a common experience of life in a place. Now, you can unpack what a national bird means for a country, if it even matters. It's not like there's a right answer. But in this project, I seek a balance between pretty pictures and geographic reality. I'm interested in the experience of geography. When we create maps, how do we explore what it is to be there? This may come from engagement with locals. It may come from putting a pack on, getting in the field. It may come from listening to nothing but music from the region you're representing. And perhaps it's the kind of thinking that gets a thrush named the national bird of a mega-diverse tropical country. Upon learning about the friendly iguiro, I brought its song up on YouTube and closed my eyes. I imagine not the cloud forests of Costa Rica's volcanoes, but an urban park in the nation's capital, or a rural farmhouse awaiting the rains. Initially dismissing this bird, now I saw a perfect choice. The iguiro is iconic officially and experientially. I've since been more interested in the seemingly ordinary or plain, because if you filter only for bright and shiny objects, you're merely decorating. So it was when a clay-coloured thrush joined a strawberry poison dart frog, a squirrel monkey, a blue morpho butterfly, a three-toed sloth, a Hercules beetle, and a hatchling sea turtle, along with the other 400-plus animals on this map. Drawing this has been an unbelievably heavy lift, but a journey that I've loved every moment of. I hope that others will find enjoyment and geographic inspiration when exploring the map. Thank you.